chapter 8, 9, and 10, the subject is doubtful things, or things of which all believers are not all in agreement on. Things that some believers think are right and others think are wrong, okay? Now, it's in the form of, in chapter 8, verse 1, now concerning things sacrificed to idols, which is what I would underline. Now concerning things sacrificed to idols. The issue is meat that was sacrificed to idols before it was put on the discount rack as cheap meat in the local market. There are really three things going on here. One is there is at a macellum is a food market, and we find intact a macellum at Pompeii, where you can actually stand there and see it. And right in the middle of it is a tolos. It's a round building where they did fish. Around the outside is grains and meats. Grains are usually where you enter, breads, and we know that because the paintings were on the wall to tell you what was for sale there. And then as you're looking forward, the center has the fish market, and then all the way at the other end is an altar. And next to the altar was a place where they had a series of small in-rooms, restaurants, fast food places. And so you have those who went to the macellum to get lunch. All the meat there was offered to the idols and then grilled and then sold at the restaurants there. A public place where they're sold. A second amount of meat was put out on the street for sale, so that not all of it was grilled right away. Some of it was given to people, not given, but sold to the meat market, and was typically a little bit cheaper than some of the other butchers in town, because the animal that was butchered was given to begin with to the guild, and so it was free coming in. It's kind of like Salvation Army gets stuff for free and then sells it. It's kind of like that. They can sell it for cheaper because they got it for free. And so that's the second thing going on. First, you have public eating in a public space next to the market. Second, you have a marketplace to sell off the meats. And the third one was people who were involved in various kinds of, how do we say it, like pagan sacrifices. And they would invite people to large picnics that you could come over to their house for different festivals and things that went on in the pagan world. These three things are going on in the background, and the whole subject comes down to this very simple statement. I want you to think for a moment about chapter 8, verses 1 to 13 as being public, a public time when people in public are involved in something. So there were some members of the Corinthian church who were partaking in food that was associated with sacrifice to idols, and others in the church were upset because they were involved in it, because they said that that thing came from an idolatrous place. Stop. That sounds laborious. What we're saying is some people in the church will be offended because what you're doing came from someplace bad. Okay? Hence the Christmas trees and Easter eggs. It started with something bad, therefore you shouldn't be involved. Okay? Some people will be offended. Other people will be offended because they come out of a cultic background and that had something to do with their old life. And therefore they're offended. What we're not talking about is things that God's word has said are wrong. If God said never eat eggs, then Easter eggs would be wrong. But we're not talking about things that God said something about. We're talking about indirect things, like he said something about this, and that came from that, 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 and this is what they do. And now I'm offended all the way back. Okay? We're talking about secondary issues. So, this is meat sacrificed to idols. And it says, in the beginning, verses 1 to 3, Paul starts with a disclaimer both to groups, to both groups, that knowledge brings pride and love builds up. So here's the problem. You can be right in what you're saying, but be wrong in what you're doing. Let me say it this way. He says, we all know that we all have knowledge. Knowledge makes arrogant, but love edifies. Look, knowledge without love is incomplete. So when I told you earlier, love has to be based on truth. truth without love is tough, is rough, it's not nice. And so he says there's some people who are going to walk around storming around because they have this knowledge of something. Have you met these folks? They know. They're not interested in anything. They know. Okay? He says, look, dial it back a little bit. If anyone supposes that he knows anything, he has not yet known as he ought to know. What is he saying? It's impossible to know anything? No. He's saying be humble. The more educated you are, the more humble you should be. Education should lead us to humility because we realize that things are a lot more complicated than we thought they were. I find that with each passing year, I have a greater level of education and I have a greater sense that I don't know a lot because there's too much I don't know. And I find that sometimes young college students start off knowing everything because they have the knowledge of the back of a matchbook cover. They read it in an article, therefore it is fact. And I would say the further you go into something, the more you should be humbled by the size and complexity of the issues. Verse 3 says, if anyone loves God, he is known by him. That is, you have to root your position in your walk and identification with God. That's how it's not how much you know that matters. It's how well you know God that matters. Okay? Then you get down to verses 4, 5, and 6. So he's given sort of his caveats. He's given his little disclaimers. And one group had knowledge that certain foods were wrong to eat because they were associated with pagan worship. Paul reminds them that there's only one God and that idols don't actually exist at all. They're not actually real. It's not about the food, but about keeping pagan practices. I want you to look in verses 4 through 8. Therefore, because knowledge must be mixed with love, therefore, concerning the things, the eating of things sacrificed to idols, we know that there is no such thing as an idol in this world, and that there is no God but one. No statue is real. It's not a real God. Somebody made it. But then he says, for even if there are so-called gods, whether in heaven or on earth, as indeed there are many gods and many lords, yet for us there is but one God, the Father, from whom all things are all things, and we exist for him, one Lord, Jesus Christ, by whom are all things, and we exist through him. In other words, the truth is that it's not really an intrinsic problem. This statue is not a challenger against God. It's a statue. And it was made by somebody, and it's just as easy to throw away as it was to make. Here's the bottom line. It's not real. So there's nothing wrong intrinsically with putting a piece of meat in front of a statue. The statue doesn't do anything to the meat at all. It's not intrinsic. It's not an actual problem within. However, verse 7, not everybody knows that. Not all men have this knowledge. But some, being accustomed to the idol until now, eat food as if it were sacrificed to an idol, and their conscience, being weak, is defiled. I want you to be introduced to one of the players here. He is weaker brother. Let me just say, weaker brother is not a person who's offended at what you do. Weaker brother is a person who will fall down and stumble in their walk because they saw you do it. Weaker brother is the alcoholic that left a life of alcoholism, and by watching you drink a beer will say, it's okay if my Sunday school teacher does, and therefore they'll do it, and they will stumble back into a life of alcoholism. In other words, weaker brother is not just some other Christian who goes, well, I don't think you should be allowed to do that. That's what you call a pain in the rear end. Weaker brother is somebody who is going to stumble because of it. Do we all understand that? Okay? Because it's going to become important that you keep the people straight. So, if they're wounded in their conscience, they honestly feel wrong is being done in the name of Jesus, they are wounded inside, they are weak. Verse 8, but food will not commend us to God. We are neither the worst if we eat, nor the better if we do not eat. In other words, if I set aside that piece of meat and I don't eat it, I'm not more holy or less holy. It's irrelevant. They don't know that. They think it's relevant, but it's not. So what he says in verse 9 is, but take care that this liberty of yours does not somehow become a stumbling block to the weak. So what you don't want to do, because the person is more important to you than the meat, is allow the meat to make the person stumble so that you can exercise your liberty. You have the right to eat it. It won't help you, other than the fact that it'll add calories or whatever. It won't help you that you do or harm you that you do. It's irrelevant, but it may harm someone else. And as a Christian, my view has to be not only to what I get out of it, but what everyone around me gets out of it. So verse 10, so if someone sees you, I want you to circle the word sees you, and that's what makes 8:1-13 a public setting. If they see you, who have knowledge, dining in an idol's temple. Would you underline dining in an idol's temple? This is a public place where you are sitting. Now, why would a Christian be dining in an idol's temple? Because it doesn't look like it's an idol's temple. It's part of the meat market strip mall. It's out there in the middle of the market. It is at an edge of the shopping mall, and everybody's coming and going. And up till now, heretofore, you have always eaten there, and why should you stop? Let me apply this in a very real way. If we had a Chinese restaurant in town that had a little Buddha statue when you went in and there was a little incense burning, would you feel like you couldn't go in there and eat? You probably have gotten so used to it, you wouldn't even notice that it was there. But what if you were with a Buddhist friend who that represented their unsaved life, and they can't understand how you could walk into an establishment that was obviously being watched over by the incense burning to Buddha? Would you think twice about it if you had a Buddhist friend? That's what he's saying. In a public setting, somebody else may evoke images in their heart and mind that it doesn't have in yours. Because it's just some little fat, happy Buddha with big ears sitting there with a little incense burning, and you don't really care. But he says, for through your knowledge, he who is weak is ruined, the brother for whose sake Christ died. This guy's crushed when he sees his Sunday school teacher, his deacon, his Bible study leader walking right into that door and sitting down, because it's a public thing. So, verse 12 says, so by sinning against my brother and wounding the conscience of the one who is weak, I sin against Christ. Therefore, if food causes my brother to stumble, I will never eat meat again, so that I will not cause my brother to stumble. When you get to chapter 9, in the 27 verses of chapter 9, Paul uses himself as an example of laying down freedoms and rights for the sake of the other person for the furtherance of the gospel. You are never wrong to lay down a right you have so that other people will be saved. You are never wrong to lay down a right you have so that other people are not offended. You can always lay those things down. However, I caution you about something. When I was a young believer, there was a guy who went to a college that I won't name, because if I name it, it would probably not be good. And his son went to this college, and he was in our church, and he came to me and he said, Brother Randy, I'm offended that your hair is parted in the center, because that is rebellion. And he brought out something that somebody preached that said it was rebellion. I had never heard of it, so what did I do? I changed my hairstyle. Because I thought, that's cheap and easy. Why should I offend this guy over the sake of my hair? I didn't care that much about my hair. I don't care that much about it now. It's hair. A couple of months later, he came to me and said, Brother Randy, I want you to know I'm offended at the size of the tires on the back of your car. Well, now we're in a problem. See, I'm a Bible college student, and I am flat broke. I mean, broker than broke. I have the coolest car ever. It's a station wagon. It is a Chevrolet Bel Air station wagon from the mid-60s that went 0 to 50 in about 20 minutes if it was downhill, okay? This is not some power car. Now, it did. It had wider tires on the back. I don't know why I bought it that way. I didn't care. They had tires. They went around. I was happy. It went forward and backward. I would have been blessed with just air conditioning and heat that worked. But no, he's on my tires. So He says to me, Brother Randy, wide tires are an indication of rebellion against the Lord. It was news to me, so I looked at him and I said, okay, you had me on the hair. Here's my problem. Mr. Hamilton, I can't afford another set of tires. So if it's offensive to you and you want to buy me different tires, I will be happy to drive down the road unrebelliously brandishing my skinny tires. But if you're not going to pay for it, I don't know what you want me to do because I'm broke. I'm trying to get gas money to get back and forth to school, and you're on new tires that you're offended about. You know what happened? You are going to be surprised. It was a miracle from Jesus. The offense went away. He just stopped being offended. You know why? Because it was going to cost him. What I'm saying to you is, I will do anything I can to help this guy. But I cannot find anything in Scripture that says that Paul would move one little bit for a person who was this guy. What's the difference? This guy is going to fumble his faith. This guy wants to control yours because he wants control. It isn't about fumbling. So I want to tell you whether you should drink coffee or get a Christmas tree or have wide tires or wear your hair or. Now here's the problem. Paul is a leader. He can surrender his rights to win people. But if you surrender your rights as a leader for this person, you let them run the show by lowest common denominator. They take over. I'm offended at that music. You got to remove that drum set. We can't have a piano. And all of a sudden, it's a free-for-all, and nobody's leading except for the latest offended person. That's a problem biblically. Biblically speaking, you should be willing to set aside any right or freedom you have to win somebody or stop somebody from stumbling. However, if they're not going to stumble and they're just trying to control your life, they're not in charge of it. And if you give them the right to be in charge of it because they're going to be offended, you are creating a Christianity that is untenable. Does that make sense? I want you to, as much as you can, be at peace with all men, especially those of the household of faith. But there are some people who will come into your life and tell you what should be in your CD rack. That it's offensive to them. Now, you may not want to play something they can hear. I think that is chapter 8. You may even decide to put it away in a place where they can't see it and never have to engage it because chapter 9 says, I have the right to give up my rights for you. I have the responsibility to give up my rights to help as many people as I can. But you do not want to convey to people that whenever they're offended, they get to run your life. Because it won't stop. They will tell you what kind of car seat to have for your child. They will basically tell you what. I had people say to me, I cannot believe that you are driving a Kia. It ought to be an American car. To which I said to them, can you find one? Because there's not an American manufacturer that's actually all American parts. The only question is degree. Okay, so your Ford is filled with Chinese and Korean parts. So stop telling me like there's this one on the corner I'm wounding by buying this one overseas. It's not like that anymore. It's all like this. It's only the question of whose label gets put on it. And some people would look at me and go, well, you're getting sassy. No, what I'm doing is I'm trying to tell them that their standard is wrong. And that if they try to make that the standard, nobody's going to be able to live with them because we don't have anybody that does what they want done. So we'll all end up buying horses, good old American horses. That's why they're called Arabians. Okay, let's go to chapter 9, all right? Verse 1, am I not free? Am I not an apostle? Have I not the Lord Jesus? Are you not my work in the Lord? If to others I am an apostle, at least I am to you. For you are the seal of my apostleship. My defense to those who examine me is this. Do we not have a right to support? Do we have not a right to eat and drink? He's talking about support. Don't we have a right to get a paycheck? Verse 5. Do we not have a right to take a believing wife? Don't we have a right to a family? Verse 6. Don't we have or do only Barnabas and I not have the right to refrain from working? Don't we have the right to abstain from working while we're studying? Is that not a work? How about verse 8? I'm not speaking of these things according to human judgment, am I? Does not the law say these things? Not to muzzle the ox? Don't we have a right to be paid for the work that we're doing? Verse 10, or is he speaking altogether for our sake? Yes, for our sake it was written, because the plowman ought to plow in hope, and the thresher to thresh in the hope of sharing the crops. It's not wrong for us to expect some payback for what we do. If we sowed spiritual things to you, is it too much that we would reap material things? Do you see what he's saying? Spiritual is so much higher and harder and more meaningful and more deep and more rich. Shouldn't we get a few bucks for it? But if others share that right over you, do we not more? If other people get paid by you for spiritual things, don't we more since we started the church? Drop down to verse 13. Do you not know that those who perform sacred services eat the food of the temple, and those who attend regularly to the altar have their share from the altar? Look, if you go back to Jerusalem and just take a look, you'll find out that the Levites and the priests eat from the food. It's not wrong for us to actually get support. Verse 14, so the Lord directed those who proclaim the gospel to get their living from the gospel. Underline, get their living from the gospel. It's not wrong to pay the guy who's preaching to you. It's not wrong. But, verse 15, here's the key, I have used none of these things. He said in verse 18, what is my reward? I may offer the gospel without charge so as to not to make full use of my right in the gospel. You see, for though I am free from all men, have made myself a slave to all so that I might win more. Now, look at the atonement law statement. I stand in line at the temple. Look at verse 20. To the Jews I became as a Jew. I go to the temple when I'm there so that I might win Jews. I don't have to stand in line at the temple anymore because Jesus paid for my sin, but I know that they don't know that, so I stand in line at the temple. To those who are under the law, as under the law, though I might not myself being under the law, so that I might win those who are under the law. He says, look, I don't have to do all the things that go with the atonement law. My atonement was complete in justification, but I still do it. Why do I do it? Because I want them to listen to my message, so I do it. And then he goes in verse 21 to those who are without the law. He says, when I go to those who are without the law, as without the law, though not being without the law of God, but under the law of Christ. When I'm out in the Gentile world, I don't walk along trying to do all kinds of things that are uniquely Jewish because that's not going to win them. Verse 23, I do all things for the sake of the gospel, so that I may become a fellow partaker of it. Do you not know that those who run in the race all run, but only one receives the prize? Run in such a way that you might win. He says, look, don't be ridiculous. Some people try to make their Christianity so that it's a dead-lose opportunity. You want to be weird? Just be weird. But I don't try to go out there and be as weird as I can so that everybody will go, wow, look how weird he is. I actually try to fit into the society to win as many people as I possibly can. That's what I'm trying to do. I'm not walking around with, Jesus saves plastered to the front of me. Ask me how. I mean, I don't want to be offensive on the front end. I want to win a hearing for the gospel. And he says in verse 25, everyone who competes in the games exercises what? Self-control in all things. They then do it to receive a perishable wreath, but we an imperishable one. Therefore I run in such a way as not without him. I box in such a way as not beating the air, but I discipline my body and make it my slave, so that after I have preached to others, I myself will not be disqualified. He says, look, try not to do things that make you just weird, and try not to do things that disqualify people from being able to hear you. You don't want to do that. People are more important than your rights. Your rights are only going to last for a few years, then you die. But that person going into a Christless eternity because they were offended or thrown off by your rights is just simply not worth it. So he steps back and he goes, I want you to understand that it's perfectly okay that I did not exercise my rights. It was the right thing to do to lay aside my rights. Now, if there was a public use, I want you to see that there's still a second problem. The second problem has to do with a private use in my home. I want you to go from chapter 10 all the way down to verse 23. Here's your second problem. Okay? I'll take care of the first 22 verses after, because he goes in a little parentheses. It's one of those Paul parenthetical moments that get lost. Okay? Don't get lost. Go down to 23. So in chapter 8, verses 1 to 13, he said it was in a public place. But here, he's now talking about 23 to 26. He's talking about 10, 23 to 26. In my home. Now I want to go to a private place. What about if people don't agree whether or not I can do something, but I know the Lord is okay with me doing it? Can I do it in my home? So in verse 23 it says, all things are lawful, but not all things are profitable. We've heard this before, right? All things are lawful, but not all things edify. So I ask myself, is this going to build me up? Is this profitable to my Christian life and experience? But look at verse 24. Let no one seek his own good, but that of his neighbor. So I also, as a second rule, I keep my eyes on how it's going to help my neighbors. But then he says this, eat anything that is sold in the meat market without asking questions for conscience sake. Why? The earth is the Lord's and all it contains. So he says, can I buy meat that has been sacrificed to idols? The answer is yes, but don't ask. So this is the don't ask, don't tell of the Bible. Walk into the market, and if it's for sale and you want it, buy it. Don't ask where it came from. Why? Because if you ask where it came from, it opens up a whole new can of worms. Guys, I don't know why this happens, but I have all kinds of Christians in my life that love to ruin my fun. They run around telling me, well, you can't buy this because this is made by those people who gave this much money to that cause. Well, now you ruined it for me. I just wanted to eat it. I didn't want to know the pedigree of everyone who touched it. I don't really want to know all that. So I walk in and I want to buy this cheese, but this cheese comes from this cheese company that is all about social causes and reforms. And now I've got a problem with my cheese. So what Paul says is, eat the meat, don't ask where it came from. Is that hypocritical? No. It just allows you to live in peace. There's some people on a witch hunt. Have you seen these guys? They're all over social media. They want to check out all the deep, dark secrets of how you're going to, if you buy that, that supports them who does this, and they're over here. Can you tell me which gas company can I put petrol in my car that isn't giving it to pagans? Can you tell me what can I buy in Publix that doesn't support an unsaved person somewhere doing something that God isn't happy with? So really? Do I need to go on a wild, should I get this cheese or this cheese? Let me investigate the company. I have an iPhone. Come on, buy the stupid cheese and go home and don't know any better. Does that sound biblical? It is, because that's what he just said. He said, don't do an investigative reporting over everything you're doing in your life. All you're going to do is drive everybody crazy. I wish that some people wouldn't send me the articles they do. I wish that some people would just let me eat the cheese I want to eat. I wish that some people would keep their mouth shut and serve good coffee and give me a good coffee at a good rate, and then I'll buy it. Because I don't want to be that guy. Do you? Do you like this? Do you enjoy a world that's like all about every social cause every time you try to do something? Because I just want to eat what I want to eat. I like food. And I want my food to be peaceful. Now, there's a third place that Paul talks about, and this one is a fun one. This is my favorite part of the entire book. This is in verses 27 to 33. And this is at the picnic. This is 10:27 to 33. This is at lost person's picnic. This is an unsaved person still likes you as a believer. Celebrate this fact. And they invite you to a picnic. So here's what he says. Now, I'm being serious about this. I know it looks like I'm joking. I'm not. It says, verse 27, if one of the unbelievers invites you to go to eat, Eat anything that is set before you without asking questions. I really work on this verse. I try to eat everything set in front of me. Don't ask. Now, if you're standing there and you put it in your mouth, and another believer comes up to you and says, this meat was sacrificed to idols, stick it all in your mouth and go, I'm so sorry, I never eat meat offered to idols. It says, you can't eat it for the sake of the person who's saying it. So what you do, my thing is, I think it's a Kit Kat moment. I think what you do is shove all of it that's in your hand in your mouth, then put the rest of it down on the plate and say, I never eat that. Here's the thing. I mean, you know what I'm trying to say. Verse 29. I mean not for your conscience, but for the other guy's conscience. He says, if I partake with thankfulness, why am I slandered concerning that for which I gave thanks? Whether then you eat or drink, whatever you do, do all to the glory of God. Give no offense either to the Jews or the Greeks or the church of God, just as I also please men in all things, not seeking my own profit, but the profit of the many, so that they may be saved. In other words, my expectation is that I'm not going to offend the believers that are currently believers just to reach the unsaved. You're going to hear this as a philosophy. There's a lot of people who are going, well, we want to get out there on the edge and do what unbelievers do and be in the life of an unbeliever so that they come to Christ. And in the meantime, you're offending all the other believers. Isn't that what he told you not to do? You know, I understand that believers don't live exactly like unbelievers, and that's a good thing. But I also understand that you can just be offensive to believers while trying to reach unbelievers. Don't be so cutting edge in your evangelism that you diss all the believers. I have friends who want to do a Bible study at a local bar, and so what they do is they get together and they praise Jesus and have some songs at the bar, and then everybody sits around and has beers as they're doing it. And this is like this big, look at what we can do. We can reach unsaved people. But the problem is there's an awful lot of alcoholics in the church that are just plain mortified by what they see. I wouldn't go to a witch convention to get people saved. I wouldn't go to a Ouija board room to get people saved. I think you need to be careful because there are people that are coming out of those things where the darkness has really hit them and wounded them. I don't try to put on an acid rock for Jesus concert. You have to understand the world from which people broke free. And I'm not saying that we have to have a certain style of music. I'm saying if you go back and listen to the words of a lot of that, it was pretty raunchy. There's an awful lot of people that are flaunting their freedom and they don't see the danger in it. They're wounding other Christians. And I guess the bottom line here is I'm trying to educate Christians. That means sometimes I have to challenge them. My point is that in 8, 9, and 10, this is a story about different ways you handle something. So let's summarize. Can I do something that others might be offended at, but Jesus is not in my life offended at, in my home in private? Yes. Can I do it in an unsaved person's environment? Can I do it provided I don't realize that there's anyone there who has an offense about it? Yes. Do I do it in front of a person who I know is offended at it? No, unless it is an inauthentic offense that is only related to their legalism. In which case, what they need is education. They don't need to run the church. They need to be educated. Can I do it in a public setting with no regard to what people see? No, I always need to keep an eye on how does this look. So, Zoe is having a personal crisis, because you know her. And she's just having a personal crisis, and she's sitting in a car out by the Institute, and it's underneath of a tree, and it's kind of like 10:30 at night. And Luke is coming back from the library, because you know Luke, he's that deep student guy who just goes to the library, and he just couldn't quit. And he sees that she's sitting in a car, and she's crying. Now Luke is being a real compassionate guy. He stops, he opens the door, and he says, Zoe, are you okay? And she just starts crying. Now, he has a problem because it's not wrong for him to be out in the open with her at night and her be crying. If he got in the car, that could be a little problematic. And then, you know, when Zoe, when she gets crying like that, then she's like falling all over him and sobbing and like blowing her nose on his shirt and all kinds of stuff. Okay, now, not only does he have a problem, he's got snot on his shirt, but his other problem is, what does it look like is going on in the car? And it's Christian to think not just what is happening, but what do I look like right now? That's the reason I tell you, wear a t-shirt that has on it something you agree with, not something that you're violently against. You know, if you walk around with, you know, I'm pro-abortion on your t-shirt, do you not think that's going to be offensive to people? So what you don't want to do is walk around with Bob Marley on your t-shirt, because that's going to be offensive to people. Why? Because he was a Rastafarian who rolled joints. That's not going to be the image that you want to carry. You always have to worry about what other people see. Not because you become paranoid of it, but because you're trying to reach as many as you can and you don't want them to shut you down. Why should they take you seriously if you walk around advertising things you don't believe in? If you're willing to put that on there, then why don't you put, I don't believe in Jesus? Well, I would never do that. Yeah, but you are. That's what I'm trying to tell you. Don't sell the opposite of what you believe. All I'm saying is chapter 10 should cause you to be circumspect. Now, I've got 3 or 4 minutes before we go to a break. Let me just show you the part that we skipped, okay? Because the part that we skipped is not nothing. It's just that Paul went off on a little side alley. So verses 1 to 22, what he says is, I want you to not make the same mistake my people Israel have made over the time. So he says, I don't want you to be unaware, brethren, that our fathers were all under the cloud. That is, they received God's direction, and they all passed through the sea. They received God's rescue. I want you to know that in the history of the Jewish people, they received God's direction and they received God's rescue, and they were all baptized into Moses in the cloud and all in the sea, and all ate the same spiritual food and all drank the same spiritual drink. In other words, they went through the desert all with Moses, identified with a really cool leader. They got fed by God. They got watered by God. Everything was taken care of, the provisions. Verse 5, nevertheless, with most of them, God was not pleased, for they were laid low in the wilderness. In other words, most people don't understand that the privileges and blessings they receive from God can cause them a problem if they don't use them properly. That's his whole point. Now, these things happened as examples to us so that we would not crave evil things that they also craved. So he offers 4 lessons, 4 symptomatic things. First, they hungered for things that they shouldn't have hungered for. That's verse, they also craved. Don't be idolaters, as some of those were. The people sat down to eat and drink and stood up to play. Nor let us act, number 2 is immorality. Not only did they crave wrong things, but they acted immorally. They ignored God's fences. Guys, God puts fences in his word because fences help you. When you cross a fence or climb a fence, you should have to understand that you're now violating something God put there for your protection. Some of them did, and 23,000 fell in one day. Nor let us try the Lord as some of them did. Look at the third one. They had cravings, they had immorality, they had believing that they could trick God. That's trying the Lord. They thought they could trick God, and they were destroyed by the serpents. And what's the fourth one? Verse 10. Nor grumble. The fourth one is they thought they could be following God, but angry in their heart and grumbling in their heart. So some people are characterized by they have a hunger for things God told them not to hunger for. Some people are characterized by ignoring God's fences. Some people are characterized by thinking they can trick God. Some people are characterized by doing what God says but grumbling in their heart the whole time they're doing it. And he said these things happened to them as an example. So what is he telling them? Don't be arrogant, verse 12. If you think you're standing, you may be falling. No temptation has overtaken you, but such which is common to man. God is faithful, who will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able. That is not the same as tested beyond what you are able. You will be tested beyond what you are able. God didn't say, I won't give you a test you can't go through. He said, you can't go through the tests of life without me. But in temptation, he will never dangle bait in front of you to make you fall. If that's happening, it's either the old man, the world, or the enemy, but it's not God. He will not go, hey, I'd like to trap you. God is not into entrapping his children. At the same time, he says, with temptation, he will always provide an escape hatch. There will be a way of escape so that you'll be able to endure it. So what is he saying? You will be tempted. Now please use the escape hatches God provides. Look when temptation comes for an exit point. Therefore, my beloved, flee from idolatry. I speak to you as wise men. You judge what I say. He goes on and he says, is not the cup of blessing which we bless a sharing in the blood of Christ? Is not the bread which we break a sharing in the body of Christ? Since there's one bread and we all partake from one body, for we all partake from one bread, look at the nation Israel. Are not those who eat the sacrifices sharers in the altars? What do I mean? That a thing sacrificed to idols is anything, or that an idol is anything? No, but I say that the things which the Gentiles sacrifice, they sacrifice to demons and not to God, and I do not want you to become sharers in demons. In other words, some people know that although the idol itself isn't real, spiritual darkness is. So the statue doesn't mean anything, but it doesn't mean there's not a demonic presence there. So for some, you have to flee every part of this. It says, but he says, do we provoke the Lord to jealousy? We are not stronger than he, are we? So all his point is we have to get the lesson of the examples who went before us. We have to watch that our heart is not poisoned by the things that are going on. We have to get out of the hunger trap of being enticed by things that we shouldn't, and we have to use judgment to escape as soon as possible when we find ourselves in a temptation position. It's sort of an aside to what he was saying, and that's why I stepped around it, but I didn't want to skip it.